Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, look at the important articles relevant for your examination, be it for the prelims and the mains, and also understand which are the areas that you have to extract out of these articles for your long-term preparation as well. Along with that, we shall also be taking a look at the answer writing skills, how to improve that by taking a look at some of the practice questions. But at the same time, MCQs are also important for you to clear the prelims examination. So at the end of the session, I urge you to do visit the Telegram channel and take a look at the practice questions which can be framed from the prelims exam. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics. But before that, if you are interested in downloading the PDFs, so the PDFs for the session will be available at the Telegram group, so you can download the annotations of the PDF from this particular Telegram group. Now, if we take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today, so today in total we are going to have a discussion of around 7 of the topics, 4 of them in slightly greater detail because they will be relevant even for your mains preparation. So these 4 we will try to gain a kind of a perspective, including some amount of background information. Now, genocide and the world's averted gaze. This is about the present day genocide which is alleged to be going on in the region of Israel and the Gaza war, and how even after a long time after the Second World War, we are still not able to cap these issues of genocide. So this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Then after that, India and Indonesia, because you had the chief guest from Indonesia for this year's Republic Day. So the review of Indo-Indonesian relations, what is the background, what is the present context, and still, despite signing the 5 MOUs, you still have areas to work upon. So which are those areas to work upon, and why is India-Indonesia relationship important in the coming decades? That again becomes relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, an enduring commitment to the Indo-Pacific, about the entire role of Indo-Pacific, and with the new Trump administration, how is it that Indo-Pacific is going to shape up? So this is a slight continuation of the new administration based articles which are there. So there we will have a slightly brief discussion, because Indo-Pacific and the role of Indo-Pacific is something which has been appearing in the news articles for the past 10 to 15 days. Then, should governors head the state universities? Should they be the titular head, or should they be a kind of a ceremonial head, or a real executive power should vest in them? What are the issues thereby? What do the commissions tell us, the various different committees that the government has formed, and what should be the way forward? So this is an interesting article. This has appeared in page 10 of the newspaper, relevant again for your GS paper 2. So almost all the articles associated with the mains perspective are going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, articles for the prelims: Assam workers prone to post-TB fungal infections. What are these fungal infections and who causes them? Then, Indian space programs in 2025. This largely the entire page of article talks about. This has appeared in the science section. It talks about 2 of the missions by ISRO and the future perspectives. Then, Kerala eyes logistics boom. So with the help of this, we are going to focus on the Virinium port project. So that is the overall coverage of the article that we are going to do today. Now, before we move into the first article, first of all, an announcement to all of you. A belated Happy Republic Day to all of you. Now, owing to the festivities of the Republic Day, we have come up with a 60% off for the subscription with assured success, and now the products for 12 months and 18 months are at the said prices. Now with this, you can avail the lectures by the top educators, get access to the test series, and follow a scheduled discipline for preparation strategy which shall be successful. Now let us take a look at the first article: Genocide and the world's averted gaze. Now, 27th of January 1945, almost 80 years have passed. Now, this was the time when, as the tides of the war turned against Germany at this point of time, when the Soviet soldiers did try to enter into the various different German occupied areas, they stumbled upon Auschwitz. Now, Auschwitz was a concentration camp, right? Now, Auschwitz was a concentration camp. Concentration camp was what? Where Hitler and the Nazi party in general, they thought that certain citizens in Germany belonging to the Jews community and some other communities as well, they were of the non-Aryan races. And as they were of the non-Aryan races, they were not fit to serve the national interest. So all those individuals were sent to these concentration camps, and they suffered incredible amount of hardship. And that is when many of these millions of Jews, they were pushed into the perils of death and endless labor. So when the Soviet soldiers actually stumbled upon Auschwitz, this was something that the world did not know at that point of time. Many of them were traumatized till their dying day. And in general, the account was that we were not prepared to take a look at something which was unfolding. Now, you have to keep something in mind. This entire episode of the concentration camp and the killing of the Jews, the mass killing of Jews of million plus population, that was something which Hitler and the Nazi party did owing to a certain idea. It is not as if they randomly started picking up individuals and killing them. It was a long-term policy prerogative which Hitler had in fact imbibed from one of the great thinkers of Germany at that point of time, with the name Ratzel. Now, Ratzel was one of those thinkers in Germany who said that any state, any country, like an organism, has the tendency to grow, requirement of resources, and just like an organism eventually dies, if a country doesn't get the ideal manpower, doesn't get the ideal kind of resource availability, then the state can also die. So that was the individual from whom Hitler was greatly inspired. And that is when Hitler came upon the policy that the Jews and the non-Aryan races, they are not suited for the entire German culture and growth of Germany. Because he was afraid that Germany, if it doesn't get the ideal hardworking individuals, Germany can also die, what Ratzel had proposed. Ratzel was also the individual who gave the idea of the living space, Lebensraum, that each country, each organizational state needs to have its own living space. Now, why I am giving you this background about who was the scholar who gave Hitler this idea and from where Hitler was inspired about it? Just to give you an idea that the entire phenomena, what we refer to as genocide, oftentimes we treat it as a one-time phenomena or an event which has occurred in a spur of a moment. No. The reality behind it, that the thought process prevails for a long time. That thought process is converted into a policy action, and that policy action eventually leads to a genocide. And if the world is not active and alert enough to take a look at the thought process itself, before the world realizes it, genocide is a reality. 80 years after Auschwitz, this is something that the world is still confronting. And that is what the entire article is about. Now, you see, immediately after the Second World War, you had the Genocide Convention, right, of 1949. This is the image of Auschwitz, where train loads of these other individuals, in the sense, the non-Aryan race individuals, particularly Jews, they were shipped and they were subjected to the rigors. But the Genocide Convention of 1949, it declared what genocide is. In the various articles, it talked about genocide in detail, which are the acts which lead to genocide. but definition of genocide was the most important. This is mentioned in the Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. Now, there are multiple articles, but you don't need to go into that depth. For example, Article 4 talks about what are the various different steps that are taken by individuals and state actors, which can be termed as genocide. But what is genocide? So, means any of the following acts, any of these following acts committed with an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or a religious group. So, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. In a way, attacking a group of individuals just based on their identity, in simplest of the terms. That is genocide. Now, after this Genocide Convention of 1949, the world vowed that we will never allow this to happen again. But there were multiple events which have happened. For example, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, where between 1975 to 79, you had leaders in Cambodia who wanted to create an ideal communist state inspired by the Marxian thought. And that is where many hundreds and thousands, and as per certain calculation, millions of people were subjected to death. Now, during this time also, when this was happening, you had the Vietnamese invasion eventually which happened, and the Khmer Rouge regime, they were on the run. Now, while the entire world should have condemned the crisis, what happened? The world took a political stance. Countries like China, large powers in the nearby vicinity. Now, ideally, they could have acted proactively to prevent this genocide. But they took a stance because this Khmer Rouge regime was trying to promulgate communism. They took a stance to protect this regime. And the Western countries, they saw communism as a kind of an ideal enemy. Then again, what followed in Rwanda, that also led to the killing of thousands of individuals just based on the background. Then in Bosnia, systematic ethnic killing of thousands of people did happen, where the people were extracted from the refugee camps in the name of the UN rescue mission, and they were executed point blank. So the entire principle of never again, which was agreed upon after Second World War, that word and that promise has not been kept. Now, what we need to understand is the similarities with the present geopolitics, something which is not explicitly mentioned in the article, but something that is relevant for your examination preparation. So, during the time preceding the Second World War, as I told you, genocide is not a spur of the moment event. Genocide develops. The entire principle develops from a kind of a thought process to a policy level, and then eventually to the event itself. Now, while the entire moment was, or the entire aspect and the movement against the Jews were developing in the 1930s, and at that point of time, you had basically a lot of Jews who wanted to flee Germany. But you see, the world was grappled with its own set of problems. Western countries which were economically prosperous, now they started turning back the refugees. When we talk about US said that we have just come out of the Great Depression, the 1929 to 33 Great Depression. So US said we cannot have any refugees. UK said we cannot have any more refugees. So refugees were not allowed entry. Even today, if you take a look at it, many of the countries where the persecution of the minorities, civil war kind of situation persists, when the local population is trying to flee that area, Western countries, they are not ready to accept the migrants, the refugees. So there is a large scale similarity. Now you had multiple conferences between US, UK, France and various different allied countries preceding the Second World War. Now while they had to address the issue of refugees, in majority of the conferences, they went silent, thinking it might anger Germany, or they simply pushed the issue for the next day. So there was a kind of indecision, something which prevails even today. Thirdly, when you talk about the policy aspect of, or the foreign policy administrative aspect in US, UK, etc., at that point of time, they turned a blind eye to many of these events which were happening in Germany, which should have raised alarms. Something similar that you observe in terms of Israel, Gaza and the Gaza war, where tens of thousands of individuals, including more than 10,000 of young kids, they have been pushed to death, they have been killed in the collateral damage for the war. That is where, as the Western world turns a blind eye, we are creating a very bad precedent of what can follow in the coming years. So that is where all this indecision, partisanship based upon which side of the political aisle you are, the activities leading to genocide have been overlooked upon. So that is what needs to be course corrected as we move ahead. So if we think about the way forward, what is the way forward that one should follow? So ideally, the country should always value the ideals of humanity. And even though it appears to be very trivial, but still, the struggles of the Second World War, the genocidal actions in Cambodia, in Bosnia, in, for that matter, Rwanda, the events which have scarred multiple generations, right? Now, those genocidal actions, the world should be reminded about. Lest they forget about it, they think about it as an event of the past and they become ignorant for the future. Genocide and the tendencies, they still prevail in the present day world. All we need to do is have that citizen awareness. That awareness is very much important, because that awareness will demand for the next thing, that is government accountability. Governments across the world need to be held accountable for any such sort of crimes happening across the world. And also, just to ensure that what happened in Second World War is not repeated, the politicization of these events should be curbed immediately. Where even today we see, for example, countries like China, they take a stance that no, this individual is not a terrorist. Why? Because we are having a good relations with Pakistan, so we will not term that individual as a terrorist. So these kind of turning the blind eye because of political factor, that has showed it has got disastrous consequences in the past. It can have disastrous consequences in the future. So a political international worldview, which is very difficult to achieve, but nonetheless, it is a way forward. Okay. So in this article, what have we read about, or what is there to be talked about in the article? The article talks about what is genocide, 80 years since the Auschwitz camp was actually stumbled upon by the Russians, and the world vowed to never again go down the path. We tried to understand where this entire idea came into the mindset of Hitler and the Nazi Party, and how it turned into a policy action, eventually leading to the genocidal event. Now, something similar has occurred in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in terms of even Bosnia, and that has also impacted large amount of population. Then we looked at the similarities with the present day geopolitical context, and eventually we take a look at the way forward. From here, you can definitely expect a mains type of a practice question, so urge you to try to write about it. So the threat of genocide still looms large over the divided world. Comment. Now, it can be asked for 10 marks, it can be asked for 15 marks. Let's suppose it is asked for 10 mark, 150 words. How do you write about it? So, in the intro, what do you write? Always very important to keep the intro brief, crisp, and also to the point. So what is it that you will write in the intro? You will talk about what is genocide, right? And where is it defined? As per the Convention of 1949. So what is genocide? That is something you have to talk about. Then how do you start the body? Just to ensure that there is a connectivity from the intro, and body and intro should not stand as isolated paragraphs, what you should do is that these events of genocide post Second World War have been observed in various different regions. You can also term about the mass killing of Jews in concentration camps. So that is where the past events. Okay. Now, at the point here, you have to connect with the requirement of the question. Still looms large. So here, when you talk about the past events, there, write a couple of sentences and 2 to 3 points about the similarities with present. Similarities with present. Then after that, right? So here you have to mention with examples that why in the case of Cambodia the world did not take action, why in the case of Rwanda the world did not take action because it was an African country, did not impact the rest of the world order. So in the case of, for example, talk about in Germany, while the refugee crisis was bubbling over, the Western world was very much interested in its inward-looking stance, which is still prevalent today, and the world is witnessing the migrant crisis. So those kind of similarities, and then give the Israel-Gaza example. Gaza example. Okay. And then in conclusion, what do you write? Because it is a 10 marker, you don't have much of a scope to write way forward. Had it been a 15 marker, each of these points should also be discussed in greater detail and a separate way forward has to be written. So in conclusion, that is where you morph it with a kind of a way forward where you talk about that basically the entire world, if it needs to be a safe place for humanity, ideas and values of humanity should be respected and given the paramount importance rather than ethnicity, race, creed, and nationality. With these ideals, the world can always ensure that there is no generation in the future which has to go through the travails or the scourge of genocide. That's it. Right? So that is how you provide a kind of a way forward as well in the conclusion. But very brief way forward, not a detailed way forward. Try to write this answer on your own, get it evaluated, and take a look at where you can improve. Okay? Now, then we come to the next article. India with Indonesia. Now, Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto, now he was the chief guest in the Republic Day ceremony and parade, which was held yesterday. Now, that throws a lot of light and importance to Indo-Indonesian relationship going ahead. Throughout the year, this portion will be relevant. So, as an outcome of this visit, there were various different MOUs which were signed. So, the MOUs, 5 MOUs were signed. MOUs were signed in health, traditional medicine, then after that, maritime security, then digital development, and then after that, cultural cooperation. However, there was also a talk of strengthening and deepening the defense ties. That was also there, but these were the 5 MOUs which were signed. Now, because we are talking about Indo-Indonesian relationship, we also need to talk about the curve of relations, what it has witnessed in the past. So you see, India and Indonesia, they started getting along and started getting together immediately post the Second World War and as an aftermath of decolonization. Both found very common grounds in terms of anti-colonial mindset and approach. India, in fact, provided a kind of a no-fly zone, did not allow the flight or the overflight of the Dutch planes going over to Indonesia, for which Indonesia has always been grateful to India. In fact, Sukarno himself provided a lot of gratitude towards India for its events and activities. You had Indian leaders who were involved in evacuating Indonesian leaders from the colonial power. So that is where there has been a lot of anti-colonial commonalities and mindset which has prevailed, which has provided a common ground. But again, after the Second World War, as the world entered into the era of the Cold War, where the world was divided and fractured into bipolar world, where you had two superpowers, Russia or the Soviet Union and US, there was a lot of pressure for the smaller countries, underdeveloped and developing countries to join any of these groupings. At that point of time, along with Indonesia, India was one of the forerunners of the idea of non-alignment, but Indonesia was more than a willing partner. So the entire event of non-aligned movement, which culminated along with the Bandung Conference, that was again an important milestone in strengthening Indo-Indonesian relationship. Then after that, you have a lot of cultural similarity as well. With the progress and also with the presence of the Hinduism, obviously the Javanese Hinduism that you have in the region, there is a lot of cultural similarity. So you still have, for example, the Ramayana events which happen and the theatrical shows which happen in Bali, where it is a major tourist event and tourism event which attracts tourists from across the world. So there is that cultural connect. So that is why amongst the MOUs, you will also find cultural cooperation as one of the major agendas. Now, also another important factor of cooperation between these two countries has been that immediately after independence, both these countries were saddled with a large majority population and people of certain religious beliefs in minority. So how to handle the minorities? How to ensure that the minorities feel protected? That is where both of these countries converge. Today, if you take a look at it, Indonesia is a very vital trade partner of India. Indonesia is a very important defense partner of India, where even though we have not gone ahead with much of a development, but BrahMos missile, the sale of it, the transfer of technology, that is what we are formulating. Indonesia's largest export items, amongst the largest export items is palm oil. And India has been a ready importer for palm and oil palm from Indonesia. So we have a lot of convergences, the cultural convergences, the requirement of digital connectivity, the services export. Now, there are a lot of various different areas where we converge. So if we take a look at the common concerns that confronts both our countries, so food and energy security, for example, after the Russia-Ukraine war, which has been going on for many years now, almost around 3 years now. Now, this Russia-Ukraine war had provided a lot of stress into the availability of commodities, food, energy, etc., due to which the prices of these commodities started rising. So, food security, energy security, all of that has been a common concern, and both India and Indonesia have been finding common voices on global platform to drive this agenda. Then also, after the entire Russia-Ukraine war episode, there has been a lot of sanctions on various firms across the world, which seem to be helping the Russians or any trade with the Russians. So their Indonesian firms have also been impacted, and trade relations with Indonesia from Russia has been impacted. So there also we share the common concern. Indonesia is a vital member of groupings like ASEAN. So there, as India is envisioning the Act East policy and implementing that, the role of Indonesia becomes very vital. And you have to understand, even in terms of global connectivity, Indonesia sits at the fence of a very vital choke point of the world, that is the Malacca Strait. Malacca Strait provides connectivity from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, is responsible for majority of the trade from the Persian Gulf into eastern port of China. So that is where Malacca Strait, being a vital choke point, is one of the risks that China faces. So Indo-Indonesian relations have to be good. Now, Indonesia has also become a member of BRICS. That has enlarged the scope of cooperation that India and Indonesia can have. Even in terms of our successful hosting and presidency of G20, now we basically followed Indonesia. So both Indonesia, when it was the president of G20, followed by India when we were the president of G20, the agenda pushed was of the global common good, association and establishment of food security, and in a way, empowerment of the masses, the global laws to be followed. So these are some of the common principles that both India and Indonesia believes in, right? So G20, BRICS, ASEAN, trade and navigation, defense, all these areas are important convergences. But then there is still a lot of work to be done. There are many different strategic experts who express their frustration in the various articles about how this entire thing and the entire relation is not progressing at the speed that it should. So, for example, when we take a look at the areas to address, so there, infrastructure connectivity. So infrastructure connectivity is one of those where a lot of work is still pending, a lot of work and progress still needs to be done. For example, the Sabang port development, that is where India and Indonesia had a kind of an agreement. Sabang, for those of us who are not aware about it, Sabang is very, very close to the southernmost extent of Great Nicobar. So that allows India, if let's suppose India develops that Sabang port and maintains friendly relations with Indonesia, that will allow India, empower India to exert a choke point movement between Sabang to Great Nicobar. So that is beyond the Malacca Strait as well. It will strengthen India's geopolitical reach. So that is where we have to work more. The SA Andaman connectivity project also has not progressed and proceeded in the speed and the manner that it should. So that is where the speed has to pick up. Then increase defense cooperation. While we have agreed in principle about the BrahMos deal, that deal is not moving forward. About the transfer of tech, the value of the entire deal, that is still stuck. So once, let's suppose you complete these deals, that serves as a precursor for other countries also to be interested in your defense items. Because if they see that, yes, India traded with Indonesia, everything happened within the stipulated time limit, Indonesia benefited. So tomorrow, Latin American countries will be interested. Other East Asian countries will be interested. African countries will be interested. That will always be good for our export and trade. Then lack of common strategic view. Even despite all the MOUs, we have not issued a common global strategic view. What do we expect the world, or how do we expect the world to shape up in the next century? That is still where we have not issued a kind of a statement. That is where we need to work upon it so that we finalize the broad points of the agenda making and the global strategy. So these are the areas that we have to work upon. So overall, India and Indonesia, the relations are very vital for the next generation or for the multipolar world order. Why? Large populations, diverse populations, right? Diversity is very important. Please understand, in many of the West European nations, you will find that despite the development, diversity is not there. So when diversity is not there, you have a very different set of problems. When your society is diverse, the set of problems are very different. And that is where the countries which have diversity, and as they develop, automatically that becomes a template for rest of the world. So what we followed from genocide, the same agenda or the same kind of principles follow here as well. So large countries with a diverse population, the requirement of development, the adherence to the principles of freedom of trade and navigation, anti-colonial sentiment owing to the deprivations created by the colonial experience. So as and when these two countries get together and grow on multilateral platforms, that will be for the global good, and that will also be good for multilateralism. So associated with that, let us analyze a practice question. Discuss the importance of India-Indonesian relations in maintaining the multipolar world order. So here, what do you write in intro? What do you address in the introduction? You talk about India and Indonesia. That how these two countries, they represent a very diverse culture, a large population base with the requirement of development and adapting to the changing world order. That's it. Then in the body you follow up from there and you talk about the shared past briefly. Don't overstress on the shared past. Keep it brief. After that, talk about the areas of convergence. Because the question is about multilateralism. So in areas of convergence, you have to give increased stress to ASEAN, Look East policy, right? Then after that, G20, promoting global common good. Then after that, BRICS. So we are partners in multiple of these forums, right? Then after that, you talk about the way forward or the importance in multilateralism. What is the importance in multilateralism? And there you can also talk about the shared history about NAM, Bandung Conference, that how India and Indonesia, they were not interested in joining any of the superpower blocs. So that charts a way for the future as well, where the world is again turning bipolar between US and China. That charts a way forward. Okay? Like that, you talk about, and eventually the need for cooperation, and also which are the areas. Some of the areas need to be worked upon. There are challenges which need to be overcome. But going ahead in the future, these countries represent the diversity and the requirement of development in Asia. And that is important for upholding the multilateral world order. Okay? Now, after that, the third article, which has appeared in the op-ed page, an enduring commitment to the Indo-Pacific. Now, the Indo-Pacific region, that is the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Now, there has been a recalibration of the US policy. This entire article is about US's stance in Indo-Pacific, for Indo-Pacific. Okay, that is what the entire article is about, and also future of the region. Okay. Now you see, when we talk about the US's stance for the Indo-Pacific, this has been changing over the years. And this has been changing owing to the rise of China, and a very dramatic and a fast-paced rise of China, where the Chinese heft, the Chinese might is also increasing exponentially almost. So here, when we talk about the entire region, it was referred for a very long time as Asia Pacific by the US. The US strategic makers, this was referred to as the Asia Pacific. And the strategic thinkers thought about this as an important region. But when they refer to Asia, their entire worldview was restricted to the region of Eastern Asia. That is, regions such as Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, that's it. That is where their worldview was limited. So more or less you can see that this was western border of the Pacific Ocean. That is what they were concerned about. But in the past Trump administration, the entire worldview was this Asia Pacific was changed into the terminology Indo-Pacific. That is what it became. Now, this Indo-Pacific, the Trump administration and even the Biden administration, they have been dealing with it differently in the past decade as compared to the administrations in the US over a long period of time. So here, when we talk about the policies, basically the entire identification of the region of as Indo-Pacific also highlights the relevance of India and the Indian Ocean. Going to the west of Malacca Strait, that region has been identified for the first time. So that brings India into greater global prominence. Now, second, this is against the increased Chinese dominance. Increased dominance by China. Okay. Now, this increased dominance by China, a kind of slow and steady expansionism by China in the region of South China Sea, in the region of the Taiwan Strait, in the region of, for example, if you consider even in the ASEAN grouping, they have been slowly and steadily capturing the territories. So that is where the aggressiveness of China is to be countered. Then there have also been forming of groupings like Quad, strengthening of groupings like Quad. Now, when Biden administration followed the Trump 1.2 administration, Biden inherited the formed grouping of Quad. But Joe Biden kept that prominence of Quad and elevated it, where Joe Biden oversaw the first heads of state meeting of Quad. So the prominence of Quad increased during the Biden administration. And the relevance of Quad can also be thought about if you think about the Trump administration. One of the first ministerial meets that the new administration had was on 21st of January, again with the Quad grouping. So the relevance and the importance of Quad has been ever increasing. Now, also cooperation with countries like Australia on defense parameters, that has increased. So this is again a kind of a policy to counter China, right? So Quad, the growing relevance in the sense how US has started valuing it more. Military cooperation has also begun. Military cooperation with various countries have begun. With Japan, Australia, it is much more overt. With India, it is restricted to Malabar exercises that we have with the US and few of the special deputation of the forces, sharing of intelligence, etc. But with Australia and Japan, this is at another level. So, heads of state meeting, which was initiated by Joe Biden. Okay. Then the first ministerial meet of the new administration. Right? Now, in this region, what another factor has been increasingly stressed upon is the freedom of trade and navigation. Freedom of trade and navigation to counter China's expansionism. Now, this is again a principle that India and the US, they converge upon. They agree upon this principle as well. So, this is where our cooperation is expected to increase further in the second phase of the Trump administration. And as US looks inward in most of the policy measures in the Trump administration, this is one of the areas where the US is expected to have an outwardly reach. So here, the way forward, what is the way forward for India and also for the US? to work upon further in these multilateral groupings. Ensure the strengthening and institutional framework being established so that these particular groupings, they are not individual oriented. They are in fact organization oriented and system oriented. So that tomorrow if any other kind of a precedent comes, the entire thing is not uprooted completely. So that is one of the way forward, that strengthening of the institutions, right? So stronger institutions. Then after that, ensure economic assistance and economic development to be provided in the region, which can form an alternative to China's predatory economics. Predatory economics of China means what? That it will give you a loan, you cannot repay, it will take some portion of your land, some portion of your infrastructure, or worse, control over your government. So there needs to be an active policy to counter China's predatory economics, right? So counter policy, because only military might is not something which will win over the region. Greater importance to the Indo-Pacific by ensuring greater presence of the combined forces, not only US dominance, but because then it will again be reduced to bipolarity, but the combined presence. So ensuring more countries are a part of this global grouping. So increase in membership of these groupings as well, that needs to be sought to be done. Okay, now because it is a follow-up article, we are going to restrict the discussion up till here. So in this article, what is the region of Indo-Pacific, since when it has changed, what are the various policy initiatives expected out of the Trump 2.0 administration, and what is it that should be stretched upon going ahead. Okay, this is, by the way, again one of those areas where you can always expect a mains type of a question. So what I would suggest to you, in a blank A4 sheet paper, all that you have read till now or observed from the newspaper analysis till now about Quad, about Indo-Pacific, try to have a compilation. Include portions such as RCEP, right? The trade grouping which is there, and prepare your notes. That will come in handy in GS paper 2 for guarantee. Whether a 10 marker or a 15 marker, you can shower the question with the facts, the figures, and authenticate it to the extent you get good marks. Now, coming to the fourth article. Now, this is a kind of a deliberative article where it talks about, in a way, tries to talk about both sides of the argument. But in this article, talks about one side of the argument in most of the cases. So, should governors head the state universities? Now, you see, governor is the chancellor of all the state universities. State universities that are there, right? Governor is the chancellor. Now, most of us think that this is something which has been created recently or is something which is enshrined in the constitution itself. But this is a phenomena which is a colonial legacy. This is something which the Britishers gave us. In 1857, when the British established universities at that point of time, Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, they did not want the local influence to grow beyond their controllable proportion. They wanted to keep the locals under control. So what they did, they made governors as the appointed authorities as the heads of these universities, so that they could have a kind of a check. Now, immediately after independence, this system continued. And you had basically the government in power immediately following independence at the center and the states as well. And that is why there was no friction, because in state also you had Congress, in the center also you had Congress. So the governors, obviously, whosoever were there, they were never facing an issue. In 1967, when the state governments, they started changing, that is when the friction started. Friction in the role of the governor, but also friction in whether the governor should be controlling certain factors or not. You see, as per Article 163(1), when we talk about Article 163, now This is what is the statutory power of the governor, which talks about the statutory power of the governor, whereby the governor is supposed to act based upon the advice of the state government, the ministers. So whatever advice they give, the governor is said to or is supposed to act upon that itself. However, the governor has certain discretionary powers as well. One of the pet areas of UPSC in the prelims, what is the statutory, what is the kind of discretionary power? Amongst the discretionary powers of the governor, one of the discretionary powers is his role as the chancellor of the state university. There, he is not bounded by the recommendations of the state government. Now you see, had the governor or had the individual been a kind of a very excellent academician, right, and that excellent academician who did not have a political background, if that individual is made the governor and the chancellor of the university thereby as an ex officio post, then there would not be any issue at all. Because the governor in that case is an academician, he knows what to do in order to strengthen the university. He knows which areas to improve upon to improve the administrative efficacy of the universities. But then, multiple different government commissions over these decades, they have indicated that the governors are political in their worldview. Why? Because majority of the governors, they have remained as politicians almost immediately prior to the holding the office of the governor. They have been in active policy and active politics. In fact, the first administrative reforms commission set by the center, that was set in the year 1966-67. Even that administrative reforms commission talked about the politicization of the governor's office. It talked about the requirement to reduce the political influence of the governor's office. So that is the entire genesis. So genesis overall, if you think about it, 1857, the establishment of universities. Now, when the universities were established, at that point of time, importance of maintaining the control by the British, So as the British felt the importance to exert their control, reduce the local interference, that is where governor was made as chancellor. Now, the first immediately after independence, 1947 to 67, not much of an issue. But after 67, when the state governments began to change, that is post 67, this has been an era of conflict. Conflict between whom? Conflict between the center and the state, and conflict between the governor and the state executive. Now, when you take a look at the entire aspect that why should governor not hold the office of the chancellor? What is the issue with that? So there are various different types of issues. For example, let's suppose the state government, now state government is providing the funding for the state universities, but the state university is accountable to the governor as well, and also the CM, the chief minister and the state administration. So there is a kind of a dual reporting or dual accountability. Whenever you have dual accountability, that means it always leads to stagnation of action or a kind of a policy paralysis. Then, when we talk about appointments, many of the appointments are seen to be created by the state universities. Obviously, they will provide the funding and the governor does not clear it. So, appointments, they are in many of the universities, state universities, languishing for many years now. So, appointments. For example, even when we talk about appointments of vice chancellors are very, very important for the running and functioning of the university. But even this appointment becomes politicized. So there is politicization. Right? Now, when there is politicization of appointment, that leads to what? Let's suppose in a state university, there is no vice chancellor for 2 years, 3 years. Will the administration function properly? No. There will be inefficacy. At the same time, no regular course curriculum which will be followed. So, administrative paralysis. Administrative paralysis. And in the midst of all of this, while education at university should proceed and progress further, it keeps on getting pegged on backwards. It keeps on getting stagnated. So the entire education system, the reform of education system that we have been talking about for many decades now, that is something which remains only on the agenda paper, is not implemented. So there is lack of progress in the entire educational mechanism. Lack of progress. So these are the various issues which we confront because of the politicization of the office of governor. Now, various committees have talked about it. And as we started, the first ARC in 66-67 talked about the politicization of the governor's office. It talked about the fact that majority of the individuals who are governors, who are made governors, they belong from a political background. So they peddle the political ideas. Now then, you had the Rajamanar Committee of 69 to 71, which was set up in Tamil Nadu, by Tamil Nadu. So basically, that also talked about that restrict the entire role of the governor as per Article 163(1), which meant that there has to be all the actions taken by governor has to be limited only up till what is the recommendation of the state government and the state ministers. There should not be any discretionary power of the governor. So this talked about no discretionary power. Discretionary power. Okay. Then you had the Sarkaria Commission, 83 to 88. That also talked about the center-state relations. All this you would have read in polity already. Now, Sarkaria Commission said that 60% of the governors, they are politicians in the manner that they have been holding active political post right up till they take the role of the governor. So that again brings about politicization of the office of governor. Then you had a kind of a study, a detailed scholastic study carried by Ashok Pankaj from 1950 to 2015, found that 52% of the governors were in fact politicians. Then when we talk about the entire National Commission to review the working of the Constitution by Justice Venkatachalaya. Now, this also talked about the importance of reducing the discretionary role of the governor, and similarly, something was highlighted by the Panchi Commission as well. Again, for establishing the center-state relations, talked about the depoliticization of the governor's office, ensuring that the governor follows the recommendations of the state government, so that the tussle is not there. But then what is the way forward? You see, there is an argument also in place. As a civil services candidate, it will be gross injustice if you take a look only at one side of the argument. The argument which is put forward is what? That if you create the office, or if you create chancellor as, let's suppose, give it to the state government, or you keep governor simply as the titular role, then that titular role is very small for a large office like the governor. So that will be the belittling of the governor's office if you keep it very titular. So that is where the counter argument begins and stops. But what should be the way forward? The way forward is the need for reforms. You see, states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, they have reformed this entire concept of the state universities, who handles them, etc. But then Kerala, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, they have been trying to reform this entire process, and the bills have been stuck for the president's assent for many years now, almost close to a decade in few cases. So that is why the role of the governor when it comes to education, it has to remain either titular titular, follow recommendations by the state government, Now you see, even Supreme Court had taken a stance where being the chancellor of the state university was something which should come under the discretionary power of the governor itself, right? By the state administration. Okay. So these are some of the things. Now, we can also follow the Western school of thought here. In the West, if you take a look at universities like Oxford, if you take a look at universities like Cambridge, they have chancellors. Chancellors, but then is very much a ceremonial position. And chancellors who become the chancellors, they are generally a kind of very acclaimed academician, a very acclaimed individual in their field of prominence. They are made as chancellors, because being a chancellor is not about what you teach in the class or teach in the sessions or how the education system progresses. It is a flagship position because it will convey a lot of things to the budding future candidates as well, and also what is your value as an educational system. So that is where ceremonial chancellors, people of great academic prominence, they should be involved more in terms of the taking the role as the chancellors. But here also there is a risk of increased politicization of the office of the chancellor, for which there needs to be a periodic accountability setting as well. Okay. Now these committees, the office of the governor, discretionary power, statutory power, that becomes relevant for your prelims, but the overall aspect of policy paralysis initiated because of the governor and the tussle with the state government, that is very vital for your GS paper 2 mains exam. Now let us take a look at few of the articles in a short manner, relevant only for your prelims. So the study has found, a research has found that tea bagan workers, or the chai bagan workers as they are known as in Assam, they are very prone to getting the post-TB fungal infection. Now, TB is a disease that we have talked about recently, tuberculosis created or caused by mycobacillus. Now, that tuberculosis impacts your pulmonary system, can impact the other systems as well. Now, at that point of time, when the body is already weak, many of the individuals who have taken the medications and recovered from TB, they have been found to be suffering from a kind of a fungal infection immediately caused after that, and that fungal infection is created by the fungi, that is Aspergillus fumigatus. This is a fungus. Now what it does, it creates chronic pulmonary aspergillosis. Now what is this chronic pulmonary aspergillosis? What it does, it in a way attacks your immune system, right? Creates a kind of a immunodeficiency and creates a situation where the individual keeps on coughing, has the issue of cough, has also the issue of spewing out or spitting out blood with cough. So the strength of the individual keeps on reducing, and eventually it can lead to mortality as well. So that is the issue of post-TB, but also many of the individuals suffering from TB, they also can get impacted by this. So that is what this disease is. Who causes it or which fungus causes it, that becomes important. What is the aspect of it and what are the implications of it, that also is important. Okay. Now, then Indian space program breaks into 2025 in mission mode. Now, immediately as we dawned upon and we entered into the year of 2025, ISRO had major announcements to make. Various different technology demonstrations were being held on, and most importantly, the space docking experiment, what is also the SpaceX, the space docking experiment, whereby ISRO launched couple of satellites into the space which were at a distance and inserted them at differential velocities into the orbit, and they had a distance of few kilometers in between them. In multiple exercises, the distance between them were reduced, but in the first exercise, what happened? These satellites eventually were meant to couple together and dock together. But then in the first exercise, what happened was that as they tried to converge and got very close, there was a few meters of gap in between the satellites. So the experiment was abandoned. Again, the distance was increased. Again, the distance was reduced. Again, there was a fault. Again, it was increased. And finally, the docking between the satellites happened. Eventually, what it led to was by sending the command in one of the satellites, both the satellites could be operated and both the satellites could be controlled. Now, this space docking experiment, right, this becomes very vital. Why? Because India aims to create its own space station, what is also the Bharatiya Antariksh Station. Now, that Bharatiya Antariksh Station will require this docking, where multiple different modules can come together, and by giving the command in one of the module, you can control the entire station. So this is very vital for the progress of India's space sciences. At the same time, when we talk about space missions, let's suppose, or interplanetary mission like a mission to Mars, or let's suppose a mission to Moon, there also space docking is a vital parameter to recharge the fuel, the supply for the crew, etc. But along with that, in the same mission, ISRO also carried out another experimental module. That was the POEM. So the PSLV Orbital Experiment Module. Now, in this, what happened was, so in general, when you have the satellite launches, what do you have? In the first stage, the boosters, they decouple. In the second and the third stage, thereby, the fuel which is there, the solid fuel ducts, etc., and those containers, they decouple. Then you have the satellite insertion. And the fourth phase is most of the times considered to be a kind of a waste. But in this, the POEM experiment, what happened was that the fourth phase was utilized to insert the satellites in different orbits at different velocities, at different speeds. Now, multiple different private players, they deployed their own satellites. Now, in the article, you have the individual satellite name given by the private players as well. But that will never be asked because there are so many of the private players getting into the field of satellite experiment in India that you cannot possibly rectify all of them. So ignore that. But understand what is this POEM. It provides opportunity for the scientific community to carry out certain in-orbit microgravity experiments for extended duration. If you recall, ISRO had released a time-lapse video of growing of leaves in the space. So this was as per this experiment itself, the fourth stage of the PSLV experiment. So otherwise, the fourth stage would end up as space debris, but now it is used for injecting the primary payloads and thereby carrying out these experiments. They serve as precursor to validate proof of concept, which will help us when it comes to the Gaganyaan mission, where we aim to send the astronauts into space, right? So what is SpaceX? What is the POEM mission? And at the same time, the building up of the third launch pad for which the sanctions have been received, that is going to, or for which the money has been allocated and the money has been sanctioned, that is going to further speed up our ability to launch the satellites going ahead into the future. It will increase further private player participation. And once you improve in the space race, your ability to manage conditions on the ground, be it minerals, be it agriculture, be it connectivity, be it infrastructure, that also expands drastically. And in the modern day age, your global influence comes along with that. Okay. Then we come to the last article, that is with local foreign firms in tow, Kerala eyes logistic boom. So basically, this entire aspect talks about the requirement of the logistic hubs. And when the logistic hubs are created, what is the prospect of it, or what is the outcome of it? Now, Kerala is developing the very controversial Virinium port. Now, this Virinium port, once it is developed completely, will form one of India's deepest water ports. Now, deep water ports are very important. Now, that is very much a kind of an outcome of the local geography, in the sense that when we talk about the eastern coast of India, the eastern coast of India has got a geography somewhat like this, topography somewhat like this. So large ships and large containers cannot exactly come closer to the shore because much part of the ship is underwater as well. So they cannot come exactly closer to the shore. That is why you need the ports which are much more deeper. In the sense, closer to the coast, you need deeper water so that large ships can come closer. Now, Virinium Port, in a sense, provides that, where the depth of the water immediately closer to the coastline is close to around 10 to 15 meters. And in certain cases around the region, more than 15 to 20 meters as well. Now think about it, the Colombo port, which gets most of the major traffic of large containers, has got a draft depth of almost around 10 to 12 meters. Now that is something which attracts majority of the shipping vessels into Colombo. This is the trade route. And from here, the materials, the containers are loaded into the small vessels and they are transported to the rest of the country. Now, with the development of Virinium, that will go out of the window, where now Virinium Port will become one of the first ports in the country to be able to handle the Panamax class carriers, the largest carrier containers which are there. So the location of Virinium becomes important for your prelims. Okay, and the north-south arrangement, particularly with regards to Tuticorin, Ennore, Chennai and Kochi. The north-south arrangement of these ports, something we have already covered in our bi-weekly and monthly places in news sessions. You can take a look into that as well. So with that, we understand the importance of port in Virinium. It will create greater economic boost, it will provide jobs and will further the amount of investment in the region. And that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the session was helpful and has added content to your existing knowledge set. Try to write the answer and take a look at the multiple choice question. The questions will be uploaded in a few minutes' time. The PDF shall be provided in the Telegram group. I shall be uploading that as well. If you have liked the content, put that in the comment section and bless us with your like, share and subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.